ever driven to the Los Angeles International Airport or on the freeway interchanges of the 105 and the 405 freeways, there's a modest green sign on the side of the road that dedicates the freeway interchanges to a man named Enomoto. Now, if the sign even catches your eye, you might wonder, who is Enomoto? What did he do? Why did Los Angeles dedicate a freeway interchange in his name? But as the sign disappears in your rearview mirror, the thought also leaves you. Enomoto was an American soldier who fought in Europe during World War II. On April 5th, 1945, he was assigned to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and he was attacking Nazis near Cervetza, Italy. When his squad leader was wounded, he took over. He made one-man frontal attacks, and he actually even took out 2 German machine gun nests just by throwing hand grenades. But as he was returning to his soldiers, an unexploded German grenade bounced off his helmet and rolled towards them. Without any hesitation, he ran through withering enemy fire, leapt on top of the grenade, and smothered the explosion with his body, giving his life to protect his soldiers. Enomoto was posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest award an American soldier can receive. So, why name a Los Angeles freeway interchange after him? Well, Enomoto was a bona fide war hero. He was born in Los Angeles, and he also happened to have Japanese ancestry. He was Japanese American. From the time when the grenade bounced off his helmet to when it exploded underneath his chest, he didn't have any time to think about what he was leaving behind. His family that was incarcerated with over 10,000 other Japanese Americans at Manzanar. My family, the Enomotos, were also incarcerated at Manzanar. Hi, I'm Lucienne Enomoto, and I'm a sophomore here at Valencia High School. So let's rewind to December 6th, 1941. There were about 120,000 Japanese Americans living on the west coast of the United States. And here in Southern California, the largest Japanese American community was at a place called Terminal Island, which was home to a very vibrant fishing industry. I come from a family of fishermen, and my family owned a boat called the Patriotic. And the only flag that we flew was the American Stars and Stripes. Terminal Island was a full-blown community. It had fish canneries, ports, parks, churches, and even schools. But after Japan bombed American military bases on December 7th, 1941, the United States federal government uprooted every single Japanese American person living in Terminal Island and everywhere else on the west coast of the United States and incarcerated them in prison camps. Even before this attack on Pearl Harbor, there was pre-existing discrimination. The Japanese Americans were excluded through the Immigration Act of 1924 and the Gentlemen's Agreement, and these immigrants could also not apply for citizenship under the Naturalization Act of 1870, so these immigrants could also not purchase or own land. And this attack on Pearl Harbor shaped this pre-existing discrimination into a really dangerous frenzy. There was widespread fear that the Japanese would attack the west coast of the United States next, so frantic suspicion was cast upon all Japanese Americans immediately. And all of this fear and hysteria culminated into Executive Order 9066, which President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed on February 19th, 1942. It ordered the incarceration of all Japanese Americans living in the United States into prison camps. And these prisons were built in really desolate areas, and they were euphemistically called relocation centers or camps. Even though the United States was simultaneously at war with Nazi Germany and Italy, they were completely unaffected by the German Americans and Italian Americans were completely unaffected by Executive Order 9066. After this order took effect, Japanese Americans were ripped out of their lives. The ones who were more active in the communities were taken away first. They were given just 48 hours to leave, to take everything they had, everything that they could carry with them. So a lot of things had to be left behind. This included heirlooms and family photos. Also, anything that can be interpreted as signs of collaboration with the enemy. So this included letters and books written in Japanese, the flag, obviously, and even kimonos. And a lot of families just ended up burning their personal items instead of just leaving them behind for looters. World War II veteran Bill Clifton had a Japanese-American girlfriend and heard about Executive Order 9066 while he was fighting in the Pacific Theater. He says that executive order that Roosevelt put out, it was inconceivable. He also calls Executive Order 9066 one of the worst executive orders that any president has ever put out. Because, come on, they were all citizens. At 21 years old, most young people are thinking about starting their career, going to college, starting a family. But at 21 years old, my great-grandmother, Enomoto, was forced to worry about taking her two small children and everything that she could to prison. Everything that she packed away was stored into a steamer trunk, which sits in my house today. In Southern California, the Japanese Americans were sent to the Santa Anita racetrack in Arcadia, California, before being transferred to the internment camps in the desert. Here, they were housed in horse stalls that were still filthy with horsehair, manure, and dirt. There were only a few bathrooms, and they were a long walk away. There were 10 camps created in all. They were in Tule Lake in Manzanar, California, Jerome and Rower, Arkansas, Minidoka, Idaho, Heart Mountain, Wyoming, Granada, Colorado, and Posta and Gila River, Arizona. And all of these camps were built in really desolate and remote areas. And the weather here was really harsh. It fluctuated between freezing and sweltering. These families were kept in hastily built wood barracks with little to no privacy. They were also kept behind barbed wire fences that were armed with soldiers who also had rifles and machine guns. The United States held roughly 120,000 Japanese Americans in these camps from 1942 until the war ended in 1945. And the thing is, most of these people that were held in these camps were natural-born U.S. citizens. My family was incarcerated in Block 18 at Manzanar. So as Japanese Americans, we use different terms to refer to what generation of American we are. So the Issei refers to the generation of the Japanese that was born in Japan that emigrated to the United States, and the Nisei refers to the first generation of Japanese that was born here in America. My great-grandmother, Enomoto, was a Nisei, and I'm a Gosei, which means I'm a fifth-generation American. Despite how the Japanese were mistreated during this time, there were thousands who still wanted to volunteer to fight for America in the war to prove that they were good Americans, that they were loyal to their country just as any other citizen. So about 12,000 young Japanese American men, like Tsutomu Nomori, volunteered to fight, but unfortunately, they were placed into a segregated unit, much like how African Americans were. And the name of this unit was the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And they fought against the Nazis in Italy, Germany, and France, their unit of all Japanese Americans, and they even liberated Jews from the Dachau Nazi concentration camp. Another example of the 442nd's heroism was in the Vosges Mountains of France. On October 26, 1944, roughly 275 soldiers from the Texas National Guard were completely surrounded by the Germans. The 442nd was ordered to break through and rescue these Texans. So after 4 days of incredibly intense fighting, the 442nd broke through. They rescued 211 Texans while sustaining 2,000 casualties, including 140 killed. The 442nd is actually the most decorated unit of its size and length of service in military history. They received a total of 15,383 decorations, and in this total, 9,486 Purple Heart medals, which are bestowed to American soldiers who were wounded in action. They eventually earned the nickname the Purple Heart Regiment, and here are the rest of their decorations. The slogan of the 442nd is "Go for broke." This is actually an old gambling term, and it means to bet all of your money on a single roll of the dice, to give everything that you have in hopes of a huge payoff in the end. Tsutomu Nomori went for broke on April 5th, 1945. He gave everything he had, his life, in hopes that his sacrifice and the sacrifices of other Japanese American men would pay off in the end. So now you might be wondering, even though the Japanese Americans fought so bravely for their country, why were they still interned? Clearly they showed their support and that they were loyal to their country, so how was this still even allowed? 3 Japanese American men filed legal action against the federal government to try and fight the mass incarceration of the Japanese Americans, and the most significant was Fred Korematsu's case. In Korematsu versus United States, he challenged Executive Order 9066 on the terms that it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and the 5th Amendment. You see, the Japanese Americans were interned and deprived of their life, liberty, and property without the due process of law. When they were forced en masse into these prison camps, there was no jury trial, nothing before a judge. There was nothing except an FBI agent showing up to your front door telling you that you had to leave. However, despite Fred Korematsu's efforts, the US Supreme Court still ruled that Executive Order 9066 was still valid. They also said it didn't exhibit any racial prejudice, even though the German Americans and Italian Americans weren't affected. They said it was simply part of a military strategy to keep America safe. World War II had devastating impacts on the Japanese American community. So after Japan was defeated in World War II, they were let go from these camps, but they weren't free from the social and economic consequences of the war. They still faced racism and hatred. Okay, yeah, sure, they were freed, but what did they go back to? All of their homes on Terminal Island were being lived in, all of their possessions had been sold, stolen, or lost, and they had little to no money. However, despite all of these hardships, the Japanese Americans still found a way to bounce back. For example, my family started Henry's Market, which was a mom-and-pop grocery store in Culver City after the war. Over 80 years later, you can visit Terminal Island. There's no businesses there anymore, no residences. It's actually just a shipping yard with huge crates and a giant crane. But some of the original town does still stand, with its abandoned and boarded up buildings, stray cats, and vacant lots. It's an eerie ghost town in Los Angeles. The only vestige of this once vibrant fishing community is the Terminal Island Memorial. Here, there's a statue of two Japanese American men who are working underneath a torii gate. One of the fishermen looks out towards where the fish canneries and homes used to be, while the other looks through the torii gate and out towards the ocean. Eventually, any Japanese American who was imprisoned in one of the 10 internment camps received a $20,000 redress from the federal government through the Civil Liberties Act in 1988. But does $20,000 really replace the homes, valuables, and businesses lost? Does it make up for 3 years of wrongful imprisonment? Also, what about the people who had died before the redress was even sent out? In remembering Japanese American history, Rose Ochi, who is actually related to our very own Mrs. Omokobu, was an extremely important activist. She sent President Ronald Reagan an article about a World War II Japanese American veteran who had died in action named Kazuo Masuda. And by sending President Reagan this article, she was a key factor in getting the Japanese Americans the redress in 1988. She also fought to make Manzanar and the other camps National Historic Sites in 1992. My point is, we as a society have to learn and study our history so that events like this never happen again. We have to learn from our mistakes so that we don't let all this fear and hysteria blind us again to the point where we let our federal government take away the life, liberty, and property of another specific and targeted group. Those that do not study history are doomed to repeat it. Thank you.